Step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider what humility is and what the practice of it can mean to us. Humility means freedom from pride or arrogance. Indeed, the attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of AA's steps. For without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. Nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than they may be required just for sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming truly happy. Without it, they cannot achieve much useful purpose or, in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. Humility, as a word and as an ideal, has had a very bad time of it in our world. Not only is the idea misunderstood, the word itself is often intensely disliked. Many people haven't even a nodding acquaintance with humility as a way of life. For thousands of years, mankind has been trying to satisfy its three basic primary instincts. We now live in a world with such abundance that we will have all of the security and personal satisfaction we desire. The theory seems to be that once every day's primary instincts are satisfied, there won't be much left to quarrel about. The world will then turn happy and be free to concentrate on culture and character. Men will have shaped their own destiny solely through their own intelligence and labor. Also, for thousands of years, we alcoholics have been demanding more than our fair share of security, prestige, and romance. When we seemed to be succeeding, we drank to dream greater dreams. When we were frustrated, even in part, we drank for oblivion. Never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. In all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of humility. We had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. Quite characteristically, we had gone all out in confusing the ends with the means. Instead of regarding the satisfaction of our material desires as the means by which we could live and function as human beings, we had taken these satisfactions to be the final end and aim of life. True, most of us thought good character was desirable, because with a proper display of honesty and morality, we'd stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our chase after what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for whether our instinctual needs were met or not. We never thought of making honesty, tolerance, true love of man, and an unconditionally loving higher power the daily basis of living. For just so long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively by our own individual strengths and intelligence, for just that long was a working faith in a higher power impossible. This was true even when we thought that God existed. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs which remained barren because we were still trying to play God ourselves. As long as we placed self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon a power greater than ourselves was out of the question. That basic ingredient of all humility was missing. For us, the process of gaining a new perspective was unbelievably painful. It was only by repeated humiliations that we were forced to learn something about humility. It was only by the end of the long road, marked by successive defeats and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency, that we began to feel humility as something more than a condition of groveling despair. Every newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous is told, and soon realizes for themselves, that their humble admission of powerlessness over alcohol is their first step towards liberation from its paralyzing grip. So it is then that we first see humility as a necessity, but this is the barest of beginnings. To get completely away from our aversion to the idea of being humble, we must be willing to work for humility as something to be desired for itself, which takes most of us a long, long time. A whole life geared to self-centeredness cannot be set in reverse all at once. When we have finally admitted without reservation that we are powerless over alcohol, we are apt to breathe a sigh of relief, having done this only to learn, often to our consternation, that this is only a milestone on the new road we are walking. Still goaded by sheer necessity, we reluctantly come to grips with those serious character flaws that made problem drinkers of us in the first place, flaws that must be dealt with to prevent a retreat into alcoholism once again. We will want to be rid of some of these defects, but in some instances this will appear to be an impossible job from which we recoil. How can we possibly summon the resolution and the willingness to get rid of such overwhelming compulsions and desires? We take our initial steps in this process grudgingly, yet we do take them. When we have taken a square look at some of these defects, we have discussed them with another and have become willing to have them removed. Our thinking about humility commences to have a wider meaning. We may still have no very high opinion of humility as a desirable personal virtue, but we do recognize it as a necessary aid to our survival. Where humility had formerly stood for a forced feeding on humble pie, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient which can give us serenity. This improved perception of humility starts another evolutionary change in our outlook. Our eyes begin to open to the immense values which have come straight out of painful ego puncturing. Until now, our lives had been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. We fled from them as from a plague. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering except when escaping via the bottle, which was always our solution. Character building through suffering might be all right for saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. Then in AA, we looked and listened. Everywhere we saw failure and misery transformed by humility into priceless assets. We heard story after story of how humility brought strength out of weakness. We soon discovered humility to be a healer of pain. We realized we needn't always be bludgeoned and beaten into humility. A great turning point in our lives came when we sought for humility as something we really wanted, rather than as something we must have. It marked the first time when we could commence to see the full implication of Step 7. We have seen that character defects based upon short-sighted or unworthy desires are the obstacles that block our path to living in peace with ourselves and our fellows. We now clearly see that we have been making unreasonable demands upon ourselves, upon others, and upon a power greater than ourselves. The chief activator of our defects has been self-centered fear, primarily fear that we would lose something we already possessed or would fail to get something we demanded. Living upon the basis of unsatisfied demands, we were in a state of continual disturbance and frustration. Therefore, no peace was to be had unless we could find a means of reducing these demands. The seventh step is where we make a change from a demand to a simple request. With humility as our guide, our change in attitude permits us to be willing to try humility in seeking the removal of our other shortcomings. Just as we did when we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, we must now acknowledge that there is hope of the same result respecting any other problem we could possibly have. We must be careful not to delude ourselves into the belief that by completing Step 7, our defects of character have been magically removed forever. we humbly ask for their removal, but we still have the capacity to use them in the future any time that we decide to run the show solely on self-will. It shouldn't be surprising if our behavior is accompanied by the very defects of character that we are asking to have removed. When we ask our higher power for help in removing our defects, we are now living on a spiritual basis. Trusting something greater than ourselves requires spiritual effort in choosing humility simply for itself rather than for our selfish, self-centered desires. As we develop a stronger connection with God, we will be guided away from choosing our old character defects and be enabled to match calamity with serenity.